Thank you for choosing to watch our video. Please like and subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon for notifications of new content. Leave us a comment and watch the other videos that we're happy to provide for you. And now, on to the sermon.
Flourish. Flourishing has kind of become a key word. It's kind of become a more psychological word. And to illustrate this, Adam Grant, who I've brought up quotes by him before, Adam Grant in the New York Times said this: "The psychology community calls this lofty combination of physical, mental, and emotional fitness flourishing. It's the exact opposite of languishing, that sense of stagnation." So I like the idea of the fact that it is physical, mental, and emotional fitness. And of course, the only thing that I'm going to do with it this morning, as you might expect, is turn it into spiritual fitness. Tyler J. Vanderweel, if I've pronounced his last name correctly, and I hope I have, he said that flourishing really is what people are ultimately after. It's living the good life. We usually think about flourishing as living in a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. It's really an all-encompassing notion. And the nice part about it, as far as our lesson is concerned, is that it's actually a biblical notion, because that's what we're concerned about, it being a biblical notion. I've asked you to turn to Psalm 92. When you look in the 12th verse, the word flourishing actually occurs a lot of times in the Old Testament, but I like verse 12 of Psalm 92 because it says, "The righteous shall flourish like the palm tree." So if we're consistently, and when you think about flourishing, you can think about a lot of synonyms, like prosperous and successful and thriving and blooming and growing. But when you think about it spiritually. And I like actually the metaphor of the palm tree, because a palm tree is a tree that can take actually quite a beating as far as the elements are concerned. And yet it doesn't give up. It can be beset by some fierce winds. It doesn't break. It can be beset by some pretty meager water rations during the year. And it doesn't die. So I like the idea, and I think there's an appropriate idea here with flourishing as it relates to kind of the palm tree. That brings up a good question. Are we flourishing? I like Colossians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. There's several places that you could go when you think of a similar idea in the New Testament. I'll just bring up Colossians 2, verses 6 and 7. Paul there wrote, "As you therefore have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in Him." But how do I need to walk in Him? Well, look in verse 7. "Rooted and built up in Him and established in the faith." Have those good roots. Have that unbreakable structure. Be rooted and grounded and established in the faith, as you have been taught, abounding in it with thanksgiving. And I like that. It's a really nice image. So we need to know, how do we abound in the faith? How can we abound in what really matters? Those two quotes that I brought up, of course, talks about flourishing in a lot of different angles and a lot of different positive aspects. We obviously have to give it to the concept of the spiritual. I really think, without using the word, I really think that the idea comes out in the Proverbs, for example. Let me give you a couple of, for instances. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 28 says, "He who trusts in his riches will fail, but the righteous will flourish like foliage." Or you go a little bit further, you go to Proverbs chapter 14, verse 11. "The house of the wicked will be overthrown, but the tent of the upright will flourish." And that kind of takes your mind away from identifying flourishing with something that's just superficial, with something that just relates to the world, our affluence, our wealth, it takes it away from all of that. And it puts it back to something that's the most important. So in kind of considering all of that, how do we meet the needs of the soul? When we think about going into the new year, how do I get it to really, really deeply affect everything that I am? And then therefore, flourishing. In the lesson, we're going to look at 5 ways that we can flourish, but then we've got to also consider very quickly kind of 5 roadblocks, 5 things that we need to put off in order to help us to really, truly flourish. And some of these kind of roadblocks, the first 5 I think are nice and pleasant. The second part of it might hurt, but it might be a necessary hurt for us to consider how to get better. So, first and foremost, how do I get better? 5 ideas that I just want to present you with. First of all, we're going to begin with needing the Word. 1 Peter chapter 2. Look with me in 1 Peter chapter 2. And we're going to see again a good way that Peter presents people looking at the Word. So verse 1, we'll come back to the concept of this. In verse 1, therefore laying aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking. So we've gotten away from the bad part. Now look in verse 2. Because in verse 2, as newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the Word that you may grow thereby. So desire it. Desire it. And I know that I've probably said it over and over again, but the fact of the matter is you simply cannot grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ from 2 Peter 3 verse 18. You cannot do it. You cannot do it without the Word of God. And that's why every time when we come together, whether it be a Bible class or whether it be a lesson, everything tries its very, very best to focus on the Word of God, to make sure that we are exposed to the Word of God. And that kind of commitment teaches people that this is the lamp that lights the path. This is the way that leads to heaven. This is the bread that can satisfy the soul. And that's the point that we need to be bringing up. We're going to talk about tonight devout young men as the way that John describes it. And one of the descriptions that he talks about is how they deal with the Word. And we're going to deal with more of the synonyms of looking into the Word tonight. But there's no way that I can meditate or dwell on or abide in the Word. That's the phraseology that John uses that we'll talk about tonight. There's no way that I can do it without having some kind of exposure first to the Word. So as we think about the new year coming, think about the way that you expose yourself to the Word of God. You know, think about the fact that maybe when you're driving, maybe when you're walking, maybe when you're doing this, that, or the other, you listen to the Word of God. Before you go to bed at night, just for a few moments, or maybe you kind of greet the day as you wake up. Read the Word of God. The average, and I know I've mentioned this before, the average chapter takes about 3 or 4 minutes to read. And starting the day or ending the day with the Word of God, that exposure to it, is a fantastic way to center your mind on things that are spiritual and then get you to where you can flourish. Second one, let's talk about. Second one is that we need prayer. Jesus is a great example with prayer. Let's look in Matthew chapter 14, verse 23. Because I like this, Jesus, we've got a lot of instances with Jesus in prayer, but I just want to bring up this one. Matthew chapter 14, verse 23. And I want to bring up this one because I think it serves as a worthy illustration. And here's what I mean by this. In Matthew chapter 14, if you'll kind of scan down those first 22 verses, Jesus has performed a notable miracle. So he's fed the 5,000. So after Jesus comes from kind of this spiritual high, I mean, we would all consider it a spiritual high. What does he do in Matthew chapter 14, verse 23? And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And now when the evening came, he was alone there. And Jesus does this multiple times. The gospel writers will denote that he would kind of go away somewhere privately to pray, lots of times on a mountain. But if you keep on going in Matthew chapter 14, Jesus is about to go through the walking on the water and the instance where Peter is getting out of the boat and trying to come to him. So the point is, I like the fact that when you play out kind of the whole panoply of Matthew chapter 14, Jesus has something that we would all consider pretty spiritually thrilling. He's able to do this great thing in front of 5,000 people, but then right before he has to turn and go into literally the deep and walk on the water and bring the disciples out and teach them this dark, deep lesson on faith, he prays. And I like the point of it. No matter how your day is going, what do you need to do? You need to pray. Psalm chapter 42, here's just a slight suggestion for you. Psalm chapter 42, there are lots and lots and lots of times where we feel like that our prayers are kind of getting a little bit stale. We've said the same things, and we have kind of a formula for our prayers in the public assembly, and that's not a criticism at all. But that tends to kind of then move into a formula that we might have for our prayers when we are privately talking to God. And I know that over time, that kind of gets a little bit stale. So here's a suggestion. Psalm chapter 42, and in verses 1 and 2, and this is just one little suggestion, 2 little verses for one suggestion. 42 verse 1, as the deer pants for the water brook, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? What do you think about that language? I mean, isn't that language that's kind of stirring? I mean, that kind of really gets down in you and really brings up those spiritual thoughts. So here's the suggestion. Start reading through some of these Psalms. Read through some of David's Psalm. Psalm 42 is, as far as we can tell, those of you who have Bibles that do the superscriptions at the beginning, this one wasn't traditionally attributed to David. But read some of these Psalms. And take that language deep into your heart and then begin expressing it. I'll tell you what it'll do. It'll supercharge your interest for prayer. And of everything that we talk about this morning over the next few minutes with the suggestions that'll help you to thrive and to flourish, apart from spending time in the Word, I don't know how you could do it better than with prayer. So in order to become a little more motivated in doing, think about spending some time learning these prayers, because that's what a lot of the Psalms are. They're just written prayers that we can take that language again and use them and draw closer and deeper to God. Well, brethren, third, you need worship. Third, you need worship. How many times have you been here? How many of you this morning maybe are sitting here and you don't really feel like it? And you don't really feel like it. I feel like, and there's an argument to be made for it, and there's an argument to be made against it. I stand up, and I don't mind admitting. When I stand up, whether it's reality or not, I feel like that I am in this moment, the public face of the Luke 287 Church of Christ. I feel like that as we have visitors, I have to represent this congregation as best as I possibly can. I have to give myself to a devotion to the Word and then lead you in what hopefully can be a stimulating, prosperous time together. And sometimes I get up and I just don't feel like it. And it's not so much that there's a time as far as my spirit is concerned. It's not so much that the spirit is not unwilling. I'll tell you, it's just flesh is weak. And you guys know that there were times a couple of years ago or so, I'd stand up, I couldn't see a thing. Carly, I couldn't tell if you were you or I couldn't tell if you were Mike Edens. The only way I could tell the difference is where you were sitting. I couldn't see anything. I'd grab this, try to read, and it was a pig in a poke. Some days I could see it, some days it was just all from memory. I just didn't feel like it. How many people sat here this morning and are here and you don't really feel like it? But you leave. And you're so glad that you came. I think there's an answer for that. In fact, I think there's actually a good answer for that. It is because worship can inspire, it can lift, it can ennoble, it can challenge, it can encourage, it can enliven, and it can refresh. Psalm chapter 96, verse 9. I've kind of tagged this one as the scripture that we'll consider. When we worship the Lord in the beauty of His holiness, it really stimulates people. It really stimulates people to flourishing, to growth. In short, you need to be here. I mean, there's a big, deep reason why you need to be here. Because worship, not only in what we give to God, also kind of flows along with this fourth element, and that is what we have with one another. The whole concept of fellowship. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, because Jimmy even brought this up in his prayer. Hebrews chapter 10, looking in verse 25, because the language of Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25 is actually very, very relevant here. Hebrews chapter 10, looking in verse 25. So, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some. But now here it is. Here's the point that I want us to focus on. But exhorting one another. And so much the more as you see the day approaching. So exhorting one another. And there's a lot of synonyms that you can find for exhorting. You start looking at the definition of the word. You start looking at what other Bible versions use. But the concept of stimulating or spurring, provoking, it's inciting. But it's done in a positive way. It's done to try to produce something that is worthy. And when we neglect it, we are neglecting some incredible ways that we have to actually build one another up. Let me go back to palm trees for a second. Palm trees can congregate in the desert and form an oasis. And it's kind of like the shade from a scorching sun. And so in a similar way, when we are together, we help one another. And when we help one another, we always have that constant potential to flourish. And I'll tell you, if you take that away, if you remove that, it's really, really hard, well nigh impossible to make it on your own. That's why God put us with one another, to encourage one another, to exhort one another, to stimulate one another, to provoke one another in a positive way. We need the fellowship of the saints. And then lastly, let's go to Ephesians chapter 5. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, because when we put Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19 together with Colossians chapter 3, we get a nice rounded idea of what we do. So in Ephesians 5, verse 19, it says, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. So two ideas that are put together here, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. So to what end? You know, what am I doing with it? Colossians chapter 3, verse 16, that kind of helps us. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 16. Colossians 3, verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. So, but the fact of me singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs is letting this word now dwell in me richly. In all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another. So now I have an extra step. Not only as I looked in Ephesians 5, verse 19, I'm singing and I'm making melody in this heart, but now I'm able to teach and admonish because I have the Word of Christ dwelling in me richly. And then Colossians 3, verse 16, of course, adds the psalms, the hymns, and the spiritual songs, but also singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Singing as an appreciation, expressing the thoughts of psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. All the while having it in mind, knowing that what we're saying, what we're speaking, speaks to the magnificent grace of God. And brethren, whether we're singing about our salvation and it literally has the word grace in it, or whether we're singing trying to spur or provoke or incite people to do better, it's the idea of the grace of God in it. And I would just say, just like spending time with the Word and just like prayer, There's a lot of great additional times and so many great ways that you have access to be able to hear great singing now. You know, we think about streaming, you think about various groups on YouTube who present some of these wonderful hymns along with brand new ones that we've never heard before that really can touch at the heart, that really can help us grow closer to the Lord. And the reason why is because the Word of Christ within us is dwelling richly. And we're able to sing along with it, with the grace of the Lord. And brethren, all of that is extremely important. So when you look at what can help you to grow, look at the list. Because the list is essentially what we do. Now we want to make sure that, or at least I want to make sure that I add before I kind of move on with this, that when considering everything that's on the screen in front of you, I've talked a lot about the spirit of it this morning because the spirit of it is mainly what I'm dealing with as you think about the new year. But we don't forget the element of truth. I can't ever forget the element of truth. I can't have one element. I can't be so warmed with the spirit that I forget the truth. Nor could I, as some people might think, cool off and only deal with the particulars, the specifics of truth, and have no warmth of the Spirit. Both approaches are inadequate. I worship in spirit and in truth. I have my heart right, and then what I'm doing is right. But in order to do that, and as I go forward and as I approach the year, I've got to get rid of some things that are going to hold me back. And the first one that I want to talk about simply is excuses. Let's look in Luke chapter 14. Let's look in Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14, we're going to begin in verse 16. In Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 16. Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 16, is a long explanation that Jesus is giving. It's not held anywhere else, it's not mentioned anywhere else except in Luke chapter 14. And Luke chapter 14, starting in the 16th verse, Jesus said, "A certain man gave a great supper, and he invited many. He sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, 'Come, for all things are now ready.' But they with all one accord began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'Well, I bought a piece of ground, and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused.' Another said, 'I have brought 5 oxen, and I'm going to test them. I ask you to have me excused.' Still another said, 'I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So that servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city. Bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind.' And the servant said, 'Master, it is done as you commanded, and still there's room.' So the master said to the servant, 'Go out into the highways and the hedges, compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper.'" Well, why? Because they made excuses. And they had all kinds of excuses. And the interesting thing is, when you take all of the excuses on face value, there's some of them that actually felt kind of legitimate, didn't they? Kind of legitimate. But the fact was they paled in comparison to the offer of the great supper. They paled in comparison to the banquet. So I don't know that we ought to look at everything that these people offer up and just say that they were, strictly speaking, completely unimportant. I think maybe that might miss the point. What we need to understand is that nothing should have taken precedence over the banquet. And when you think about it, as imperfect as it is, I will admit, as sometimes when we come together and maybe the prayers aren't what we think that they should be, and maybe the singing isn't as stirring as it should be, or maybe the lesson isn't as good as it should, any of it. Brethren, we're putting on a banquet here. And it is a banquet. It is a spiritual feast where everyone can come and partake of it. And in partaking of it, you can flourish. I will admit, as imperfect as sometimes it is, nevertheless, it's the banquet. And you can kind of extend that out just a little bit further. We're going to stay in a few minutes for classes. We're going to come back tonight. We're going to come back Wednesday night for more classes. It's a banquet. Who turns down free food? It's a banquet for you to grow and become better, for you to get stronger, for you to flourish. Why do you miss it? Yeah, I know there's some excuses, and some of them are pretty valid. Some of them sound pretty good. But what is more important than treating your soul to what you need? Sometimes in just being able to flourish, you've got to ask yourself, am I spending time at the banquet? So, what are some of the excuses? Well, I kind of thought I don't have enough time in putting down some of them. There are hypocrites in the church. Preaching is poor, sometimes. The preaching made me mad. The shepherds aren't leading. The church is small. People aren't very friendly, and I don't know how. Billy Sunday once defined an excuse as the skin of a reason that's stuffed with a lie. You know, some of these things are valid. Some of these things actually need dealing with. But some of them are what they are. They're just reasons. They're just excuses to miss the banquet. If you want to flourish, don't miss the banquet. Some of you over the number of years, I've seen you flourish. And one of the ways that you can measure flourishing is by how many people are coming to the banquet. And unfortunately, likewise, one of the ways that you can see people floundering is that they begin to miss the banquet. Don't do it. Don't do it. Be here. Let's think about another one, though. We need to think about bad habits. And let's go to Colossians chapter 3. I alluded to the fact that we would come back to this. So Colossians chapter 3, and let's look in verse 5. And you might make the case, and it's a legitimate one, I'll admit that. If there is some criticism to how I've termed this, I'll accept it. I've used the word bad habits. Let's Colossians chapter 3, let's begin in verse 5, and let's just say what it is and what needs to be said. You know, in order for you to be able to really, truly flourish, you've got to get the interference out of the way, and there is no greater interference than sin. Colossians chapter 3, we start in verse 5. Therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Because of these things, the wrath of God is coming upon the sons of disobedience, in which you yourselves once walked when you lived in them. Now, you yourselves are put off all of these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you put off the old man with his deeds, and you put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. You got rid of the old bad. You put on the new good. You've gotten rid of those things that hold you back from appreciating greater, deeper spiritual reality. Sean Covey once said that we become what we repeatedly do. We become what we repeatedly do. You know there's truth in that. You know there's truth in that. We become what we repeatedly do. I would almost offer it as a challenge, but I'm not going to go that far. So I will just ask you to think in your mind. Pick a show, a streaming show. A lot of them have a lot of pretty adult content in it. So if you think, this is why I'm not going to issue the challenge, but just think. If you watch a show, it's got a season in it, and it's 10 or 12 episodes, and that's roughly going to represent 10 to 12 hours. And you watch it for 10 to 12 hours. I'm not saying do it, I'm just saying go with me in thinking about it. So you expose your mind to 10 or 12 hours of that. And then, just as an experiment, you expose yourself to 10 hours of listening to the Word. I mean, you're just listening to it. Or listening to psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, streaming it or something else. Spending your time, 10 to 12 hours, again, you can put all this together in it. In praying to God and then doing your own reading. And just ask yourself, after those 2 10 to 12 hour periods, how did I come out after doing both of those? And I think if you'll be honest with yourself, you'll understand exactly what this man said. We become what we repeatedly do. We need to think about that. It may be that the bad habits are what holds us back. Bad relationships may be exactly the same problem. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, of course, spoke about how bad company can corrupt good morals. But think in Proverbs chapter 1. Let's look in verse 10. Proverbs chapter 1, starting in verse 10. This is kind of the same idea. It's just expressed differently, and we haven't went through this very often. So let's go to Proverbs chapter 1, beginning in verse 10. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. So this was the sinners talking, trying to entice. And then he comes back in verse 15 and says, my son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of the owners. You know, even Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 10, you get about verse 34 through 38 or 39. And he talks about the fact of what the gospel does. And the gospel is something that brings peace to mankind. But it doesn't always bring peace to people personally in their relationships. Because it can actually cause quite a bit of division. And we've got to be ready for that. And we've got to understand when to sometimes kind of keep that as a distance. There may even be some that you cut off completely, but some you keep at a distance. Because you understand that that interaction is causing me to no longer flourish in the Lord like I'm supposed to and like I need to. Carl Baird once observed, though no one can go back and make a fresh start, anyone can go from now and make a brand new ending. And we need to remember that as it relates to our relationships. Fear. Let's talk about fear just for a second. I haven't counted them. It has been said that there are 365 admonitions in the Bible to fear not. That would be maybe one for every day of the week, for every day of the year. That's interesting, 365. Kathy Medrano published an article, Top 10 Strong Human Fears. And so these, I'm sure, change a little bit, but by and large, they're probably going to be representative of just about most every generation. Here they are, starting from the worst, getting down to the lesser as we go down the list. Failure, death, rejection, ridicule, loneliness, misery, disappointment, pain, the unknown, and then losing your freedom. Fear negatively impacts every aspect of your life. In fact, someone once had said that it can impede, if not totally negate, every single capability that you have to flourish. Look at this in Matthew chapter 25, verse 25. Notice this, Matthew chapter 25, verse 25. This is one of the parables of Jesus again. Matthew chapter 25, verse 25. This was the man who had one talent. And just notice what he says. Matthew 25, verse 25. There were a lot of issues that he could have spoken, but he says in verse 25, as he had addressed the Lord, I was afraid. I was afraid. What was he afraid of? I mean, I thought I put down, what was he afraid of? Making a mistake? I mean, failure? Was he afraid that he wouldn't measure up to the 5 talent and the 2? What was he afraid of? The answer is, I don't know. But I do know that fear paralyzed him. And I do know that whatever reason he thought and whatever reason made him fearful, I mean, again, probably to him, it was perfectly legitimate. Jesus nevertheless addressed him and called him a wicked and a lazy servant. A very stirring passage to me is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, where Paul told Timothy, and I enjoy this, and I need to remember this more and more myself, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Let's close this list off with something that's pretty big. Worry. Worry. What do we have to worry about? What do we have to worry about? Here are a few suggestions. So you tell me how I did. My suggestions were the stock market, job security, the moral condition of the world, upcoming elections, health issues, computer viruses, tax deadlines, parenting problems, marital conflicts, identity theft, national security, and saving enough for a retirement. So what did I miss? Probably a list that's 10 times that long. The point is, it's really, really easy to pick out stuff that you want to worry about. That did not take very long to compile. So what did Jesus say? You know, in understanding mankind and in understanding how it works and how mankind works and trying to give comfort to the soul, of course, the Lord and Master is going to address it. And Matthew chapter 6, when you look in Matthew chapter 6, he begins in verse 19 and he's going to tell us. He's going to tell us how to deal with it. Matthew chapter 6, when you start in verse 19, he says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." He's going to talk about overcoming worry. I'm not going to spend the time to read 19 through 34. What I will do is I'll summarize it. And what Jesus does before He gives us the grand principle at the very end of seeking God and His kingdom first, He gives 3 principles. Those principles are that when my values are right, I won't worry about the unimportant things in life. Now, this is contained in Matthew 6, 19 through 34. The second one is that when my vision is clear, I won't worry about the distractions of life. And then the third one, when my master is God, I won't worry about who's in control of my life. What does worry do? Again, someone said, worry will weaken your worship, it will disrupt your discipleship, it will diminish your ministry, it will decrease your joy, and it will delay your spiritual flourishing. And Jesus Christ, laid it out. He's trying to help us as best He can to try to satisfy that nature within us that wants to have fear, that wants to have worry about what's going to happen in the future. And He tries to tell us to fear not, to not worry. Because if we understand and if we can have Him as the Lord and Master of our life, we're going to be people who spiritually flourish. So let's consider this in the end. The most popular New Year resolutions, which will begin in just a matter of hours, are to lose weight, to exercise, and to eat healthy. I would heartily endorse all of those. And why would I not? All I want to do with this conclusion is just suggest a spiritual parallel. Think about it this way. I will lose the weight of sin, which so easily besets us. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. I will exercise greater discernment. I will exercise higher discernment. What gets me there? Well, that's spending time in the Word and with prayer, building an actual connection, building a relationship with God. And then I will eat the healthy Word of God. I'll take it in. I will imbibe it. So, what do we need to do? We need to stay connected to God. Stay connected to Jesus Christ. Stay connected to the words of the Holy Spirit. We need to abide in the house of God. We need to flourish and not flounder. Because when you think about all of these elements pretty much are present every time that we come together. All I've tried to do is to try to bring up some ancillary ways that you can actually apply them when you're out living your normal life. And you can enjoy the short time that we spend together all of the other times of the week. And we need to do that because that's what flourishing does. But we also need to keep in mind that there are bad things that negate all of the good work. And we need to do our very best to contain those because those are going to work against us. And when you think about it, it should be fairly said that all of those last 5 that I showed you, all of those are the tools of the devil to prevent you from getting closer to God. So what do you need to do? You need to resist him and you need to submit to God. So the first part of the lesson is learning how to submit to God. The last part of the lesson is learning how to resist the devil. You do that, in short, and you'll flourish. Maybe this morning you want to identify this time as we're getting ready to start into the new year. Maybe you want to identify this time as your time to start flourishing. That's why we'll give an invitation. We do it so that people can come up and so people can talk about the issues, the problems, the difficulties that they have, the things that set them away from true allegiance to Jesus Christ. Come talk to us. Or maybe if this isn't your time, then talk to us at some other time. Talk to us at a later time about the way that you need to have and you need to spend more time growing your relationship with God. Become like a palm tree. And then as you become like a palm tree, then kind of become like an oasis of a bunch of palm trees that have the fellowship, that have the nurturing, and that have the protection. Yes, I know, imperfect at times. I understand that. But nevertheless, the help that we can all have to grow and develop in Christ Jesus. That's our invitation. We hope and pray that if you want to respond to it this morning, that you'll come up now and talk with us. Please, let's stand and sing.